I call this meeting of the Howson Dam and Bridge Committee to order. First of all, this is a confirmation of the agenda. The North Huron Howson Dam and Bridge Committee hereby accepts the agenda for the September 11th, 2019 committee meetings as presented.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make that motion though with a slight amendment to postpone the minutes of the previous meeting to the end of this meeting, please.
Good, that'd be fine. Seconder on that? Anybody? Okay. Rob? We can do that. That'll be fine. Declaration of pecuniary interests. Seeing none. And no circle here as well. Okay, so it takes us straight to our delegations. I want to thank everyone in attendance who's going to be presenting today. It's an information gathering for our committee. We've all read the reports, but we've never heard the personal contact of the people that perform them, and it's good that we all hear it together the same way, because you can interpret things differently when they're ready. So I guess first on the list is Andrew Ross from BMM Ross and Associates. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
You know, there's a list of questions that were sent out prior to with some of the ideas, some of the content that we had some clarity and some clarification on there. I guess we'll go through the presentation first, and then we'll kind of pick through these questions if they haven't been answered through your conversation. We can address them at that time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My presentation will be very brief because I essentially don't have any. You'll have read in the reports, I'll just give a bit of the background. You'll have read in the reports that we were involved in work with Howson Dam since 1983 with some reports prepared by my predecessor Ken Dunn in 1984 and 1985. And then there was some repair work done on the spillway, cut-off wall on the spillway. I forget exactly what year that was done. And I started with the firm in 1986, so I wasn't involved in those earlier reports, but I was involved in the bridge inspections and a few other minor inspections and reports on the bridge and the dam since that time, including an overlapping inspection that Ken Dunn and I did in 1989. And then 4 years ago, 2015, the committee asked us to design a repair to the weir to reestablish the original weir elevation. And we prepared drawings for that, which I understand that construction was not completed. So that's the end of my presentation.
What year was that?
2015. Otherwise, I'm prepared to answer questions.
I guess we can just go down through the list then. Send out the is an EA.
Excuse me, just before, Chairman, you referred to a 1989 involvement, which we don't have documented. They are on our list of documents from BMS. We've got the 1983, 84 report, and 86 report, the 2015 report. So I'm not thinking about the 1989 involvement. Was the report prepared, or was this you just out fishing off the dock?
No, there were members of staff from Wingham at the time, and I don't remember if it was just like a 2-page letter, and it may have been focused primarily on the bridge itself and not on the dam.
Is there any way that we have somebody look at that first, please? If there was any documentation that covered that? Because Andy, I don't know about you, but I
think it was a bridge inspection though, wasn't it, Andy?
I believe it was, yeah.
Well, I was just wondering what it had to have been called for a reason. What was the reason for the visit, and what was the
ministry requires bridges to be inspected every X number of years. I don't know.
So then there must have been an evaluation report published, and I'd like to see it.
Okay, we can look for that.
You,
I'm shown.
Okay.
We could do that as well.
all right.
That goes back to the question is a EA required prior to installing repairs, if the repairs do not result in a change to the design, construction, or the intent of the operation of the Howson Dam Bridge.
In our opinion, no, an EA would not be required to make repairs to the same level of standard, same capacity.
If the operation of the dam is changed, say for example, the stop logs cease to be installed in the spring and removed in the fall, is an EA required to cover the change in the operation of the move?
In our opinion, no, an EA would not be required for things such as operation.
If the dam is used to generate electricity, is an EA required for this change of use?
In our opinion, yes, EA would be required. It would not fall under the regular municipal environmental assessment. There is a special environmental assessment for electrical projects, and hydro dams falls into that.
In a letter to council dated March the 30th, 2015, entitled Proposed Repair to the Howson Dam, BM Ross recommended that the council spend $185,000 plus HST on refacing and the restoration of the upstream concrete sill. Isn't this 2015 recommendation at odds with the BM Ross report to council on the Howson Dam dated on the 14th of 1984, which stresses that the concrete and the dam, the bridge substructure, and the deck superstructure is not sufficiently sound to warrant making a satisfactory repair rehabilitation of the structure? And it is our opinion that the only course open to remove and replace the dam and the bridge structure is the only, it is our opinion that the course is only course open is to remove and replace the dam and the dam structure. The two reports are not at odds at each, as it appears. Please explain why and what, if anything, has changed.
Right. In 1984, the report that we prepared, that actual statement was made by Ken Dunn in his final recommendations, and it was parroting the exact wording of the recommendation of Peter Davies from Atkinson Davies after he had inspected the quality of the concrete. But then in 1985, Ken Dunn also prepared another overall report on options for the dam, completely replacing the entire dam and bridge, or replacing the main spillway of the dam and bridge and leaving the north spillway intact, or rehabilitating the dam. And he said that only the substructure, the abutments and piers, could be rehabilitated. He didn't think the bridge could be rehabilitated and it would have to be replaced. And so that was a year later. So obviously at that time he was thinking that rehabilitation of parts of the dam could be done. In 2015, we didn't give any type of recommendation. We were directed by the committee to prepare or design for the repairs. So again, there was no recommendation from BM Ross any which way. We just acted on the committee's direction for the design.
So, following questions through you? Or?
Yes, through me.
So the question is for BM Ross, if they were asked by council to do something that, from an engineering perspective, they didn't feel was appropriate, are they not ethically bound to highlight that before they submit a proposed action plan that's going to cost the town $185,000? Plus HST. That's my question.
Right. We did feel that there was merit in doing the repair. We certainly wouldn't have designed a repair that we didn't think would serve the purpose that you put in your directive.
So the question is, the report that was referred to in 86, was it, or 85, 86, that modifies, and it was granted, what Andy said, or Andrew? Either, what Andrew said was the direct parroting, and that's only partially true. There was a recommendation in the report written by Dunn, specifically in his words, that changed the wording of the original recommendation, elaborated on it, and therefore made it a BM Ross recommendation, which was to tear it down. So that recommendation is in writing, and if it was modified 2 years later, we don't have that either. At least it's not in the Howson Dam file folder, and I'd like to see that as well, please.
I believe the 1985 report was forwarded. Maybe that's not available to the committee right now, but I could forward that to staff. I should explain, there's, in our world, there's a difference between rehabilitation and repair. What we designed in 2015 was a repair. You could think of it as a Band-Aid repair. It was going to restore the elevation of the weir to keep holding back the water, and we also had some details in there for patch repairing the worst parts of the piers. It certainly is not what we call a rehabilitation. A rehabilitation would be where you're restoring the overall capacity of a structure. If you rehabilitate a bridge that has a load posting on it, you would expect that you'd be able to remove the load posting at the end of it. And we knew those days were gone for that bridge. So the 2015 was a repair, a short-term repair to deal with the acute problems of the dam. It wasn't going to be a rehabilitation for the dam.
Mr. Chairman, that quote, this is my question, so this is why I'm a little bit concerned about it. That quote, and what I've got in quotes, is actually not the parroting of the previous, of Davies' comment. This is actually Ken Dunn's words in his recommendation, which says that the substructure of the bridge and deck, the concrete in the dam and bridge substructure not sufficiently sound to warrant making satisfactory repairs and or rehabilitation. So it covers repairs, it covers rehabilitation, and it says that what you got there is not a sound base to work from. So if you've changed that recommendation subsequent to that report, I haven't seen it, it's not in the information that was given to us, so I'd like to see it. Because I'm surprised that you could say in a report that it's not sound, and in another report 2 years later say, well, yeah, maybe it is. There's bits of it that are, and then 30 years later go out and say, yeah, we don't have any problem with them doing some repairs. A little bit of, just struggling with that whole chain of events. So if there's missing information, I'd like to get it, please. Okay? Because I'm trying to, and why is this important? I'm trying to get a clear understanding of the soundness of that structure. Quite frankly, I don't have it right now. And it's these kinds of things where people don't spend a lot of time looking at it, issue a report, and it's very, very clear English that anybody can read and understand. It says, what you've got is not sound. Unequivocally. The change to that needs to be presented.
You're aware of your firm having that documentation from 85?
Yes, yeah, I
We
have
can
a
just
copy
get-
with me, yes.
As long as we get a hold of that. Question number 5, are you familiar with the sanitary sewer pipe crossing underneath the river just upstream of the riverbed?
Right, I think I can answer number 5 and number 6. Number 6 deals with the watering. I know of them. I don't know exactly where they are or at what depth they are. And the answer to both of these would be about the same. Whatever you do there, whether you reconstruct the dam or if you were to remove the dam, you would have to, well, the Minister of Natural Resources and Forestry would require you to do a fluvial geomorphology study to see how the bed of the river is going to change. And you'd certainly have to look at those two pieces of infrastructure and even the foundation for the Hannah Bridge. You'd have to check the drawings and do they forecast that the stream bed would change so that any of those 3 pieces of infrastructure might be affected.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
You're suggesting that that would have to be done for removal of the dam, removal and replacement of the dam?
I expect so, yes.
And what about a repair of the existing structure?
That would be up to the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry.
It's questionable whether it would be necessary for that, in your
They-
opinion?
In my opinion, yes. I think they're trying to force dam owners to look at the overall effects of long-term rehabilitation as well.
And that pretty much would answer number 7 as well, as far as the upstream Josephine Street Bridge crossing, as to whether you foresee any detriment to effect for the footings of the bridge if the water level is returning back to natural comments, of course.
So, Mr. Chairman, then, could I ask Mr. Rawson a simple yes or no answer to either of those 3 questions? Is the answer yes?
Okay.
If the dam was removed. Question was, if the dam was removed, would you foresee detrimental effects?
I cannot see or not see detrimental effects until it's studied. So the fluviogeomorphology study, whoever does that, wouldn't really care about the infrastructure. They would draw some lines on profile to show where a forecast of the stream bed would be. And then you'd have to have your engineer take a look at those 3 pieces of infrastructure. Where are they in plan and in elevation? And is there any threat to a revised stream bed elevation, to the water main, to the sewer, and to the bridge foundation?
So all 3 of those elements, are they in rock? Are they in or on rock? Are they in or on clay? Or are they in or on some mixture which is more likely to be adversely impacted by water flow? Any idea?
The only background I know of is I believe the Hannah Bridge is on steel foundation piles, which means it's less susceptible to erosion.
The Hannah Bridge is
Josephine
Josephine
Street.
Main Street. Main Street.
Bridge that crosses the pond.
the one on Josephine Street goes
Yeah.
north. And it's piled, but the Howson dam, obviously it's not piled.
No.
Yeah. Okay, we don't know what it was piled into. We do, where the piles hit refusal, do we know where that happened?
Yeah, there is some glacial till that's down there that has good bearing capacity.
Right.
Yes, and it would be difficult to erode. So I suspect that the bridge would be fine. For the water and sewer, it all depends on the elevation that they were set.
And what they were put through, you know, were they,
I don't
no,
know.
nobody, were they dug and buried? Does anybody know? Or were they drilled?
They were probably dug and buried at those times, but I don't know.
Great. Are you familiar with the company's report, BR 476, prepared by KG Dunn Engineering, dated on the December 1984, and accompanied by a report prepared by Atkinson Davies Incorporated. So do they have any comments now, 35 years later, on those reports?
I have the report here, yes. No, I certainly, the structure hasn't gotten any better. I would still maintain that the design that we prepared in 2015, at least for refacing the weir and recovering it to its original elevation, I still believe that can be done. I'm started because it's 4 years on and the condition of the piers, I would be more hesitant about the patch repairs to the sides of those piers that we detailed. It's punky concrete, and that it still could be done, but I would worry about the long-term success of such repairs. But the weir, I still think it could be refaced. And that wasn't covered at all. Those types of details were not covered in the 1984 or 1985 reports. At that time, the town of Wyndham was more looking at the overall structure to do.
That's not taking into any consideration of the deterioration of the bridge portion and its stability, either adding or retracting from the dam's stability.
That's right. In those earlier reports in the 80s, I think the result of that was that they put the load posting of 3 tons on the bridge for vehicles. And since that time, it got reduced to pedestrians only, and then since that time, we've closed it. And we have no reason to go against those recommendations. That sounds like a prudent way to go.
Are you familiar with the 1985 report prepared by the Brampton Mining Corporation Limited referencing the above-mentioned report?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
Do you know of or have any work, or have you ever worked with routing specialist Peter White, engineer of the company Multi-Urethanes?
No, I'm not familiar.
Do you have any experience or knowledge with the inflatable dams?
We've never worked with inflatable dams. We did look into it briefly for another project in Hanover in 1989 on the Saugeen River. And at that time, it was discarded fairly early in the process. But knowing that question might be coming, as I was going through our files, and we've got many files on the Howson Dam, I see that Ken Dunn did a paper cutting from April 24th, 1989 from the Daily Commercial News talking about an inflatable rubber dam on the Susquehanna River in Pennsylvania. And it was an interesting article. So I did a quick Google search earlier this week on that particular dam. It's still in service. The bladders have to be founded on a new concrete foundation, and each bladder costs $600,000, and it says it's expected to have a life expectancy of 25 years, but they did have ice damage one year and they had to replace one of the bladders. So, it would be basically a new dam if you were to use it here, because you would need a new concrete foundation on which to put the inflatable dam. So you'd have to go through the same EA. It would just be a different type of dam. It might reduce the overall cost, but then you'd have to look at the maintenance cost as well. It could be a possibility. That's all I know about inflatable dams.
I've got one in my garage you can come and kill. Do you think there would be any effects on the sewage lagoon downstream of the dam, or downstream of the dam if it was removed?
I can't imagine that there would be any effects there. It's on a different branch of the Maitland River and upstream of the confluence of those 2 branches. So I can't imagine. Ultimately, though, if you have a dam break analysis done, the analysis might go that far. And if it was dam break, would there be a backwater effect that went upstream on the other branch of the Maitland? Just intuitively, I can't imagine that there would be an effect.
I think that was the questions that were submitted. Is there anything that you'd like to ask?
Well, since we appear to have a little bit of time, you mentioned you brought the 1985
Yes.
report, with you. And you said that one changes the recommendation. So I wonder if you could just read it to us, and then we can get a copy of it before you.
It doesn't actually change the recommendations. There are recommendations in the 1984 report, and then regardless of the recommendations, it looks like the terms of reference were to look at the feasibility of 3 different options. 2 of them were replacing the dam, and another one was rehabilitating the dam, replacing the bridge. And there are costs in $1985 for each of those 3 things. Like I say, if staff doesn't have that report, I can send it through.
Yes, if Mr. Ross sends it through, I can have it scanned. I'll take the scan and circulate it and then post it on the website as well.
set.
But with that report indicates that it's okay to repair.
Yes,
The
and
substructure is sound enough that the bridge can be repaired.
that's right. Although for each of the three options, we gave a list of pros and cons. And I believe Mr. Dunn listed that as one of the cons of that option was a bit of a risk with the state of the concrete of the piers. That he had some concerns about how successful that would be.
Mr. Chairman? Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
No,
I just
no,
want to be clear with that question, because I know it's easy to mix the two up. Sometimes we say bridge and mean dam, and sometimes we say dam and mean bridge, but specific to the bridge, in your opinion, is there any methodology of repairing the bridge so that, because some of the studies indicate that the mass of the bridge is required for the functionality of the dam. So we've talked about it's possible to repair the dam weirs, and it may be possible to repair the dam structure. But if the bridge can't be brought into a safe state, then it's part of the overall structure. So in your opinion, is there a way to repair the dam, even if it's not repaired for pedestrian or vehicle use, to repair it to the extent where it can be a safe state in order to support the dam structure itself?
Sorry, did you say dam when you meant bridge? Repair the bridge? So that it can be.
Can you repair, yeah, sorry, can you repair the,
Yeah.
see, I did it.
Yeah, you did.
Can you repair the bridge so that it can be brought into a safe state and its mass can be used to support the structure of the dam?
I would be concerned that eventually the bridge could start falling down under its own weight. It is in that poor condition, chunks of it are falling down already. If there was some other way of adding mass to the substructure of the dam to replicate what the weight of the bridge is, I don't know how you would do that. Blocks of concrete on top of the piers to imitate the weight of the bridge that might satisfy it, I don't know.
Andy, do you have a-
Yes, along the same lines, so are you saying, Andy, that it's your opinion that the bridge is required in order to give enough mass to the dam?
I believe it is. Someone would actually have to go through the numbers, do a stability calculation to see if it is required, but you're obviously making it less stable. Is it way more than stable enough with the mass of the bridge on it, and it would be adequately stable without the mass of the bridge? Only going through a detailed calculation would you be able to.
That's not a fair question for you. But a few anchors would solve the problem of stabilization.
It's possible if there are soil anchors that could be used to tie it down, yes.
The pier, you're using the term pier and abutment. The piers and abutments are not necessarily required for the dam because they're above the sill level. Would you agree? I guess they're required to hold the stop logs under the current operation method. The piers would
Even
be.
if they were not required to hold the stop logs, I would be concerned that without the piers, you'd be losing some structural stiffness, maybe some diaphragm action through those piers. You may need to replicate the strength of them somehow. On the other hand, without the piers there, you wouldn't have the same ice forces or debris forces on the dam. And that was something that Mr. Dunn had picked up in his reports, is that the piers had been known to jam up some ice. And that would free it up a little bit and give you a little bit more hydraulic capacity as well. So there are advantages and structural disadvantages to removing the piers.
Another question, Mr. Chairman, please. Your 2015 design, in my opinion, can be perceived to be a retaining wall on the upstream side of the dam, reestablishing with its top at the original sill level of the dam. Agreed?
Yes?
So from your little bit of research on inflatable dams, if that was, if an inflatable dam was considered as repair or replacement of the existing dam, is that what you would foresee as the foundation, something similar to what you designed in 2015? Possibly wider, depending on the tube?
No, I think the foundation for an inflatable dam would have to be much larger. I'm just guessing from, and I don't know the technical difficulties or information associated with inflatable dams, but it looks like the one example we saw in Pennsylvania has a massive concrete foundation.
But then the Susquehanna River is a massive river.
It
Where
all
I've
depends on the
tested
height, not the
Yeah.
depth. Yes.
Okay, seeing no further questions, I want to thank you, that was very informative. Appreciate you stopping by.
Thank you.
Sir, your expertise.
Does the committee wish me to stay in case there are further questions, or shall I be dismissed?
Yeah, I think it's fair to give you guys your wish. I don't think we'll have any,
Thank you very much.
anything further. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andy.
5.2, Sid Vanderveer with the Drainage Common Law. Welcome.
Thank you. Yes, very different from Andy. I know nothing about the dam or the bridge, so I can't come with any experience whatsoever. A little background on me, I used to be the drainage coordinator with the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, and as such I was responsible for the Drainage Act. And I've often described it before, once you get into the Drainage Act, you get into drainage issues, and it became a little bit of a knowledge gathering on the common law as it relates to drainage. Now, understand, I'm an engineer by training, and that's a little bit like becoming an armchair quarterback or coach. So I am not a lawyer, but I have gathered some information on the common law as it relates to drainage and water. Basically, there's the common law and there's statute law. I think most people are familiar with the common law. The statute law, the common law deals with disputes between property owners, between neighbors. And these disputes go through court, and the courts make decisions, and out of these decisions there are principles that arise. The common law is all based on the Old English law, so it dates back many, many years. And if you go back to the 1800s, there were quite a few issues and lawsuits about dams and operation of dams. I haven't in my career gotten involved in a great deal in lawsuits or issues over dams, but I had a great reference book, and I made a copy of a chapter of it, and so I'm going to be sharing. I only made one copy of it. I'll share it with you, Sean, or I'll show you where this is also posted on a website. The book is called Water Law in Canada, the Atlantic Provinces, and you probably think, well, what does that have to do with anything? It deals with statute law in the Atlantic provinces, but it has a chapter on common law as it relates to surface water, and also on riparian rights or natural water courses. And the common law applies all across Canada and the US, with the exception of Quebec and Louisiana, which are based on the French legal systems. So the common law actually does apply to Ontario as well, or this chapter in this book does apply. Now, a lot of this, a lot of the common law, or a lot of your questions were very specific, and I mentioned to Sean that I'm not sure how much I'm going to be able to answer the specific components of the questions, such as distance of liability. Well, let me get into the way the courts view natural water courses. The courts have said that natural water courses have the right to flow and should be allowed to flow naturally. So as soon as somebody put a dam in, it automatically interfered with that right. And so when that dam was first put in, there was a potential for a lawsuit of somebody being impacted by that dam, either upstream or downstream. But then they get into something that's called prescriptive rights, and a lot of this stuff, again, is covered in this chapter. And prescriptive rights basically said, if you've had something in place for a period of time, and the period is actually 20 years, you can claim a prescriptive right of drainage, or they lose their effective right. They can always sue, but they lose their effective right for a lawsuit because you can go, Your Honor, this dam has been in here for X amount of years, and so therefore we claim the prescriptive right of drainage, or a prescriptive right to have this dam in place. Now that's somewhat of a double-edged sword, because some of your questions deal with, if we remove the dam or we change the level of the dam, what are we getting into? What I've read is that your prescriptive right is for your normal operation of the dam. So if you every spring, after the spring freshet, raise the level of the dam to hold back water, and that was the normal operation, I understand that to be part of your prescriptive right. But if you've never really, you've got stop logs, I understand you've got stop logs, but if you never actually managed it, or very infrequently, and now you've decided to increase or lower, then you may be impacting your prescriptive right of drainage. Now, so I'm going to get a little bit into now some of the questions. What's the distance upstream or downstream for which liability could be attributed? That's the one that I really can't answer. First of all, liability, there is no liability unless somebody sues. And if somebody sues, they would actually have to be able to prove that there's an impact. So who would be able to sue? Well, somebody downstream who says, you've caused, by removing the dam, you've caused a flush of water, or maybe there's sediment behind the dam that has caused damages to my property. Maybe it's water quality from stirring up the sediment behind the dam, and they can make a case before a judge, then there may be a liability. But I would also say, this is back to my comment about this being a double-edged sword. When you've raised the dam and you have this prescriptive right to have this water level at a certain point, do upstream property owners then acquire a right to have that water at that particular level? And I would suggest, and again, not a lawyer, don't know for sure, but I would suggest that they probably do. They have an expectation based on the level of the dam to have the water level at a certain point. And if you suddenly removed it, let's say you dropped the level of the dam by half, they could say, hey, I used to have, and I don't know if this is the situation here, I used to have a dock, and now my dock's down here. I've lost a privilege that has been there for 100 years or whatever. And could they make a case? There is that potential. So that's where, number one, I really can't answer how far the liability would extend. It would depend on how far the judge is willing to grant somebody to make an argument.
In your experience, is it 1 mile, 10 miles, 100 miles, 100 mile? Where have you seen cases? Have you ever seen a case that's 100 miles, or have you ever seen a case that's 10 miles?
So first of all, I think I started off by saying I really never dealt with dam issues before, and most of what I'm gathering is here.
Okay.
So I don't have any personal experience. My guess would be it depends on how far back. So if you added a dam today, if you put in a dam today and it started flooding people 10 miles upstream, then they've got a right of a lawsuit. But if the slope is fairly significant and the effect is only extended a mile upstream, then that's your limit. And that's why it's really hard to put a number, well, let me put it another way. I'm going to be really evasive and not give you a number, because I really don't know. It's going to depend on the specific circumstance and how a judge would view somebody who initiated a lawsuit on that. Yeah.
With that possibility of changing the water level and removing someone's right to that they had with their dock, is there also the reverse common law that they would then have to prescribe to the maintenance of the structure that's giving them water?
There you go. I'll answer that with an I don't know. I think it's an interesting argument. If you're going to claim a right, then you should claim a responsibility too. It's an interesting one, but that's one that I can't answer. I find that an interesting argument.
Would that be covered in the common law or not?
Yeah, all of this would, if somebody claimed it, then that would be arguments that would be raised before a judge and let the judge decide. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting argument.
Mr. Speaker, so similarly, is there also prescriptive rights downstream of the dam? So for example, the normal operation of the dam changes the downstream behavior of the river. So is there also possibly prescriptive rates downstream as well?
Possibly, but I'm having a hard time visualizing what they might be.
So for example, flood control, right?
Right.
The flood control that the dam may offer with that. So if the dam is removed and then there's a downstream flood, could someone say, well, I had a prescriptive right of protection against flood through that dam?
Again, I think that's a really interesting argument, and I think that the argument would have some merit. If you've got 100 years of history of controlling the dam to minimize downstream flooding, and now that's gone, I think that would be, I think a judge would listen to something like that. I haven't read about that in this chapter of this particular book, but that doesn't mean that, let me backtrack. The common law is constantly being changed to deal with current situations, right? So just because something hasn't been dealt with yet doesn't mean that it won't be an impact or something that couldn't be considered by a judge in the future. So I don't have an answer for you simply because I haven't read any case law that would actually support it or not support it. But again, the best I can say is I think there's a very interesting argument to that one. And I guess number 2 is the second question for the Howson Dam, where the river which it controls joins another river downstream of the dam. How is drainage liability assessed for properties impacted downstream of the point where the river joins? Again, somebody would have to make a case that they've actually incurred damages of some sort. And regardless of how far downstream or upstream, they'd have to show that they've been impacted. That's the best I can do on that one. From a drainage perspective, where is property damage more likely to occur, upstream of the dam or downstream? And I would say both have the potential. Downstream, again, you could potentially get flooding, you could potentially get erosion, you could potentially get impacts from sediment being released behind the dam if it's not being removed, and perhaps water quality from the sediment being stirred up. Upstream, damages might include unstable banks, again, loss of, this is not necessarily damage, but again, the loss of privileges or an asset that had occurred with the construction of the dam, not being a water level at an expected level. So I would say both ways there is the potential. But I want to stress there is no liability if no one sues. That's the other key point.
I have a question.
Sure.
The last major problem we had was the failing of the Gory Dam that then put strain on the dam structure here causing flooding and resources having to be brought in that normally wouldn't be brought in during an event like that. I think that's what we're talking about upstream or downstream. If we did that, like, and that happened downstream, would we have any liability of that? You know,
Yeah.
They're removing theirs.
Well, let me, again, armchair lawyer here. The fact that you have engineering reports that show some concerns over the dam, and if there was a failure and somebody sued, would that have an impact in the liability? You knew that there were issues. What were you doing to address them? And, well, you would say, Your Honor, we had a committee and we're studying this and we're trying to come up with a sustainable long-term solution and this sort of thing, but somebody still got damages. And the fact is that you knew that there were some issues. So there is a potential then in a case like that the liability might be heightened because of the awareness of the issues. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, I just thinking that the extra punishment that the dam took, it was almost to capacity. Where
Right.
It was kind of
Okay.
over the top of the spill, like as much water as possibly could go through it. That could have been structurally good for a dam that's not too good. Could have caused more damage than normally would have happened during that time. That's all I was doing.
Yeah. A lot of this is a lot of this is, the answers are gonna depend on how the cases are made to the judge and the evidence that's presented, and, it's difficult to answer, because, there is a potential, but that the dam has been weakened, I don't know that. Number 4, since there's no operating procedure for the dam, how would liability be assessed to the owners of the dam? Would it be based on operating precedents? And I think that's the case. There is a section in here that deals with if you operated in a certain way. There's a case from the 1800s, I believe, where somebody operated in a certain way and then they changed their operation. And then there was a liability assigned to that because you've changed your normal operation. But if you've operated it in the same relative manner year after year, then it implies that no, that's not normal operating procedures is not something that you would be added liability to. Explain to us what you think the ramifications would be to the township if this 150-year-old dam was to be removed, especially concerns claims from downstream property owners. And I think I addressed that. The one that because the question focused on the downstream, I'm going to remind you there is an upstream concerns or claims from upstream property owners as well. And again, I think I've addressed them, both of them, that there is a potential there if somebody feels like they've lost an asset or damage, they've received damage or lost an asset or privilege that had occurred to them over the past 150 years or whatever. So yeah, in both cases.
But this, the river that goes under this, through the dam or under the bridge, goes for a mile, Sean, is it a mile maybe? Before it joins a larger river.
Right.
And that's why that question was, what about the people downstream? So didn't you answer it? Anybody that's claiming any kind of damage downstream of the point where our branch of the river joins the Maitland River. We have Maitland? It's Maitland, right?
Both Maitland.
They're both Maitland.
North branch and middle.
North branch and middle. So where the north branch joins the middle, they're gonna have to prove that whatever it was that damage that they believe they suffered is attributable solely or in part to something to do with the bridge.
Right.
Very difficult to do, exceedingly difficult to do.
Yeah. can be done, but you're right, there's, yeah.
You gotta
And
say,
further,
these water molecules came from here and not from over here. Very, very difficult.
and the further downstream you get, the
Absolutely.
more difficult it will be. I agree. I agree. I don't want to say that there isn't any.
I'm not saying that, I'm just saying it's exceedingly difficult
Yeah.
to prove.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the topography, the likelihood of any damage downstream is very minimal. There's one property that I saw that, where she gets flooded, but other than that, I'm struggling to see where flooding downstream is an issue.
Mhm.
But the concern you raised with the upstream people, expecting to have high water and then not having that with the dam is removed, to me is more of a concern. There's more likelihood that people are gonna complain and throw rocks at council because they took away the dam and they lost an asset or something that would be an asset, the upstream. But the downstream, I'm just struggling to see who's gonna be affected.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, especially when there's no protocol for changing the dam levels and floods and that, like.
Yeah.
We don't have any procedures to say if there's gonna be a heavy rain, put in laws.
Oh, absolutely, correct. Absolutely.
So then the last one, if the dam was removed and replaced with a fixed weir with no stop logs, would that have any effect on liability issues if flooding did occur and cause damage downstream? I think if you are not operating stop logs and you have it at a certain level and you replaced it with the same, so you're just basically renewing it, building it, weir or unmoved or unoperated stop log to me are the same thing. I can't see how that would be incurring liability, but that's, again, my thoughts. So replacing a weir for a stop log, fixed stop log, unoperated stop log system, I just don't see how that, they could claim damages if it's operating the same. The other thing, and you're probably aware of this, but the other thing, again, all of this is under the common law and the liability and this sort of thing. Common law applies until it's overridden by statute law. And there was a piece of legislation that was passed called the Lakes and Rivers Improvement Act. And it requires, and you're familiar with it, Andy, it requires dams to have plans, profiles, and detailed plans that are approved. Now, the older dams, like the Howson, probably do not have any sort of Lakes and Rivers Improvement Act approval for them. But it's interesting that one of the things that I highlighted here was the purpose of the act is to provide for management, protection, preservation, and the use of the waters, protection and equitable exercise of public rights, so things like navigation, they would take that into consideration, and also the protection of the interests of riparian landowners, or property owners who own land abutting natural water courses. So today, if you were going to propose a hydroelectric dam on a natural water course and you wanted to put a dam in, you would have to get approvals under the Lakes and Rivers Improvement Act, and you would have to prove that you are have the support of the riparian landowners and you're not going to adversely impact anybody. So my point is, if you were going to be doing anything on the dam, either raising or lowering or changing, you're probably going to have to go through this process as well. And again, I'm not probably telling you anything new.
Thank you. Any additional questions for Sid at all?
Just on that point, Mr. Chairman, I think Sean mentioned he was having a little difficulty getting any commitment out of MNRF with respect to Lakes and Rivers Improvement Act. Do you happen to have any old contact people at MNRF that might be familiar with that act?
I'm at the point, Andy, where the answer is no. And how quickly my influence is diminishing. I'm looking for a speaker on something. can't even get an answer to an email, so. No.
Thank you, Sid.
Good.
Documentation online.
Good. So I'll leave this with Sean.
Scan this in.
He's the author of some of the Google thing. See it. I thought I did find that. There's some guidance for.
As a map, there, a map for publications.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, very
All right, on to 5.3, I'll call Stephen Jackson from the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority. Speak with us. Welcome, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for,
I see there's a few questions.
thank you for inviting me as a representative of Maitland Valley. Just quickly, I started with the authority in 2008, and I currently supervise planning and regulations as well as flood forecasting. So that's the general target. This is part of the business I deal with. I don't actually deal with conservation areas, which include the other dams, although I have asked some staff information in preparation for this. So hopefully I'm able to answer your questions based on the information I retained from your staff.
Do you have any presentation, or just want to go straight into the questions?
Straight into the question. Great.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Could you repeat what it is that you do? It was interesting.
I supervise planning and regulations. So planning is, we have the delegated responsibility to comment on natural hazards by the province to municipalities. So if someone is looking to develop somewhere where there's a natural hazard, such as, floodplain, wetland, could be a very steep slope, we provide comments as to whether the application is in conformance with the provincial policy statement. When the principle for development has already been established, so the zoning allows it, and someone is either looking to put a building in the floodplain, then we administer our policies through our specific regulation that we have under the conservation authority.
And what was the other one, flood control?
Flood forecast.
Flood forecast.
Yes. So we have a monitoring network of 15 stream gauges and 32 rain gauges, and we provide information to municipalities in times of flooding to help the municipality's flood response. So we don't provide information to landowners, we provide information to the municipality so that they will respond. So particularly around the timing, order of magnitude of flood events is the and in preparation to that, we do flood emergency exercises. So we go through, we look at floodplain mapping, how floods could develop. So at times we may annually practice their emergency plan. Off the top of my head, I believe it was the beginning of the previous election that we did the last emergency exercise from right here on. So whatever date that was, it was.
Do you have, Steve, do you have your responses as categorized with the questions?
Yes.
If you just want to start with number one, and we all have the questions.
Do you want me to read the whole question, or just say question one?
I don't, yeah, it better be, if you read the question, just in case, we have them in front of us.
I was hoping you wanted to read.
Well, I can.
Okay, no, I can. So what was the reason that MDCA funded engineering reviews of the dam in the 1980s? So page 4 of BM Ross report on Howson Dam issued by Council on December 14th, 1984. Quote, Mr. Davies was retained by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Maitland Valley Conservation Authority to perform visual and ultrasonic testing of core samples, unquote. On page 5 of the same report, further investigation by Mr. Davies was authorized by the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority on December 20th, 1983. The results of this further testing are contained in a letter from Mr. Davies to MBC dated May 10th, 1984, unquote. So in that time period, we had the luxury of the Ministry of Natural Resources provided funding to conservation authorities for those types of activities. So we were like the flow-through agency. So although Wingham at the time owned the dam, M&R wouldn't give money to Wingham, but they would give money to us that would in turn benefit Wingham. So it was purely set up as a flow-through agency. Unfortunately, now we do not get have those grants. At that time, it was about an 85% grant. So MNRF would pay 85%, and the Conservation Authority would pay 15%, but in reality, that 15% was paid for by Wingham through the levy. So it was really entirely the portion that was funded by Maitland Valley would have been funded by Wingham.
Okay, that answers where the money came from, doesn't answer the why you did it. That explains the funding. Why was it initiated? Who, was it initiated by the municipality? They came to you and said, we want to do this work, and therefore you said, okay, we'll get the money for you. Who on the municipality would have the wherewithal or the desire or the interest to say, we want this done? And on what basis?
So I was not with the Conservation Authority at that time.
Figured that out. You said you started in 2008.
My understanding that was a regular practice across Ontario where there are areas within CA jurisdictions. And it would be the municipality saying, we need to get funding to do something, this is a source of funding. But I'm speculating, I don't, like I said, I wasn't there, I haven't seen correspondence, but that's my understanding, my general understanding.
This is my question, and the reason I'm interested in this is, to me, when I read that you were involved, it implies an interest in the dam, okay, more than being a pass-through, a flow-through for funds, exactly. That there was some interest on the part of MBCA in the operation of that dam and its impact on flood control, river, water, the whole thing that is what the wherewithal and the raison d'etre for the Conservation Authority, not the municipality. They own it, but they probably don't know one end of the dam from the other in terms of its operation and impact on the natural environment.
So the first, if I can address one component of that, is it's the opinion of Maitland Valley that the Howson Dam does not offer any flood control purposes. So we would not have been
Even then.
even, or I don't know at what time that, I don't have a date of when that, I would expect at that time period, it was well known that that was not for flood control purposes. An example of was the Corey Dam was, when it was purchased, I believe it was in the late 60s, for the purpose of flood control, it was very realized very short on, within a few years, that it did not serve the flood control purpose. So, as far as Maitland Valley is made up of, paid for by the municipalities, so our board members are the municipal representatives themselves. So we are in fact a municipal body, so if it's a municipal interest, it's going to become very quickly a Conservation Authority interest, because it's the same politicians that work for the town sit on the board for the authority.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's rather obvious that this was done in conjunction with the DMR report, Mr. Dunn's report.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. He wrote
The
his
town-
report directly to
the town wanted and asked BM Ross and Associates to do a report. They could get 85% funding for the work if it passed through the Conservation Authority, as Stephen just explained. So they went to the authority, said, we want to have some investigation, engineering work done on this dam. If we do it through you, can we get 85% funding? And the answer was, you think so? So it went through as a Conservation Authority project. I was the manager of the Conservation Authority from 1970 till about 1974. I can assure you at that time and since, the authority has no interest in the dam whatsoever. Agreed?
From when you were there as a manager?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that
Always
predates
been
this by
open.
10 years.
Always been owned by the town, always operated by the town.
And MBCA, at the time you were chair, had no interest in the dam in terms of flood control, in terms of.
Correct.
None of that.
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, none of your flood calculations incorporate the use of that dam, then? Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. Yeah. When you consider with the dam during low flow, or typical spring flow when you put in the stock logs, what the flow rate is of the dam, which may and then how quickly that mill pond fills, you quickly realize that when you have a flood flow, so if you're filling the dam at 10 cubic meters per second and it takes however many hours to fill, if you have a flood flow of 500 or 1,000 cubic meters per second, you know, you're the fraction of the time, even if, assuming the mill pond was completely empty at the start, it would be, you know, I don't know what the calculations are, but it's,
Insignificant storage.
You're absolutely correct. I'm ignoring it.
although it would be interesting, say, to run the numbers, just to be able to say, well, it's 10 seconds or 5 minutes or 10 minutes. I don't know what they are. May I want the second question? Second question, what is the NBC's view of the purpose of dams on rivers? Does NBC encourage or discourage their use? So if I could just ask clarification on that. Is it asking on rivers in general or on rivers in Inland Valley's area of jurisdiction?
That's my question again. Yeah, a little bit of both, I guess.
So clearly, in broad terms, dams can have many purposes. You can have them for flood control, you can have them for low flow augmentation. You can have dams much like the Conestoga Dam that's used for both. They try to manage it both for flood control and to augment low flow. Low flow is augmented at times because they're trying to dilute sewage treatment flows, as well as they have drinking water sources are in the rivers. So that would be, you know, one example of their use. Other times they're purely recreational. Others are at one point they were used to generate for water power that are no longer in use. There's a variety of uses. In Maitland Valley's area of jurisdiction, it's accepted that none of the dams provide any flood control capacity. They are not operated, nor do they serve any purpose to reduce peak flows downstream.
No, that's good, that's excellent.
Okay. 3, provide a synopsis of the argument.
Sorry if I could follow up. I don't know if you really answered the second part of my question, was does the MPCA encourage or discourage their use? So for example, from an approval process, say a new dam was going in somewhere, from an approval process, would the MVCA come in completely neutral on it? Or are you likely to come in on that, you know, there would have to be a good reason to upset the status quo, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, no. So I believe if you read the letter that was under my signature to North Huron regarding the dam, the primary issues are we would want to make sure that the public safety impacts are properly understood. Is the municipality able to handle if there are increased risks? Maybe there aren't increased risks. So one is question, is there an increased risk to public safety as a result of putting in the dam? And that may, when we're talking about public safety, that means is there an access road to a structure that's going to be flooded? So if someone has a heart attack in a flood, the ambulance can't get through? Is it public safety because the fire department may be able to drive their fire trucks through 3 feet of water, and suddenly your dam is going to raise it to 4 feet to make that area inaccessible? So those are and it's not a yes or no, it's these are the issues that you need to consider, as well as with a dam, when you're looking at decommissioning a dam, that if there's an area that may be flooded, that wouldn't be flooded if it was there, you'd look at what is the area of development you might be able to actually increase as a result of decreasing the floodplain. Likewise, if you're looking to increase a dam, we'd be recommending that you look at the increased area that would be flooded in the development land that would no longer be able to be developed as a result. And that primarily relates to when someone then comes to us for a development application, we can clearly say here's the public process that went through to establish you were notified that your property was going to go from developable to non-developable. So there's a clear public process as to how that goes. So provide a synopsis of the argument for decommissioning the Gory Dam, question number 3. So as many of you know, in the June 2017, that the water came over the earthen berm and failed the earthen berm. So the Conservation Authority hired an engineer to look at the previous studies that were done and then to look at the basically the options of either decommissioning, repairing, or completely replacing the structure. Based on that information, the members of we don't have a board, we have members, so our members made a motion to only pursue decommissioning largely because both the repairing and replacing option were not within their financial needs. Much like we have in our current policy relating to structures, which is one of the other questions, we always do offer something back to the municipality, but our member, Megan Gibson, who's from Howe Township, said that it was, again, beyond, it was basically too much money for them to consider taking on the dam to look at the options. So it was primarily the sheer cost. And in that, it was felt in the report that if they went with the repair option, it would very quickly turn into the replace option because there was real questions as to how repairable that existing, there was core samples in existing concrete that were questionable. So that is a long story very quickly. So I did that answer. If there are any follow-up questions on that?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if I may, when you say decommission, what do you mean? Like, what does that entail?
So decommissioning, and this gets into one of the later questions, is the members made a decision to pursue decommissioning. So the next step will be to have a scoping meeting with the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry to look at what studies are going to be part of that decommissioning. And in that, decommissioning can look many different ways. So we'll be talking, there'll be discussions about whether, one of the berms can be preserved because it might have a cultural heritage benefit for a viewpoint or thing. So decommissioning can look different ways. So that, because we haven't gone through, they've made a decision to pursue decommissioning, but they need to do the scoping meeting, do all the studies, and then based on all that information, as long as with the comments from the public, figure out exactly how that decommissioning is going to look. So we're really right at the infancy of that.
So you're saying that it could turn around yet, like if volunteers went in to help out with some of the work? With high hose and bulldozers and stuff?
So the main issues are not, commonly people will say, well, we'll just bring in some dirt and fill it up. But as the previous speaker talked about the Lakes and Rivers Improvement Act, that we have to follow the MNRF guidelines. So at this point, the members have, their decision is to pursue decommissioning. Decommissioning can look different ways, but it is not, in my reading of that decision, is it's not open to, that's the direction they're pursuing.
Just a quick question on that. If the Murray Dam, much like, well, other than the ownership, I believe it's in your ownership. That's that dam. Being it's not a flood control, and just purely aesthetics, I guess, for pond usage, would all that be necessary? All those studies that you were talking about?
And that's the purpose of the scoping meeting, because ultimately MNRF at that scoping meeting tells you what studies you need to do. So once we do that scoping meeting, we'll know how many. So the consultant that we hired gave us a list of, so I think the price range for decommissioning ranged from $430,000 to $900,000. But that was dependent on the number of studies that were needed. So clearly the top end is everything needs to be done in the
So
scope.
would that change with private ownership of the dam structure?
They would still have to follow the Lakes and Rivers Improvement Act.
So,
Sorry,
Mr. Chairman, I just wondered if Stephen had a feeling from the public in the Gorey area, what did the public want done with the dam? Did they make any overtures to the authority or the township?
Like I said, for the best of my knowledge, cost is a deciding factor, so no one has come forward to say they're willing to bear the cost that I'm aware of.
Yeah, but the public wanted the dam repaired and pond replaced.
And I don't know if that's the, I don't know, I don't have the information here today of which public wanted it or prepared it or not. I do know they had the decision as well as, so our chair as well as the member from Howard Township. That public, their decision.
So you said that this was prompted by 2017 June water over the earthen berm, so I presume that means that I don't know the dam at all. That was a failure of the dam, was it?
Yes,
So it washed out the earthen berm, is that what you
yes.
said? Okay.
There's a hole
so-
in the earth.
Okay, so now the water just flows through there freely.
It flows through there freely during times of high flows or when ice obstructs the main channel.
Okay, so this proposal sounds like you're gonna spend between $500,000 and $1 million around that for decommission. Was do nothing an option of the report?
So the residents of the community were not happy with the current looks of the dam, so the feedback that they gave to how township was, you need to do, something needs to be done to, I believe the general words were clean up.
Okay, so do nothing was an option, but the residents told their council, we want you to spend some money to do something to make it look better.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, as another follow-up, Mr. Chairman, who bears the liability for the cost of decommissioning? Is that OCBA or is that the township of Howard?
So Maitland Valley owns the structure, so under the current policy we have for managing that infrastructure is decommissioning becomes a cost to all the members of all the member municipalities.
So the member municipalities of
Of the Maitland Valley watershed.
So that would be the individual towns, townships, the county.
You pal.
Not the county.
So
Which is why in general, when I would
So as a follow-up then, I find that an interesting process that the people paying for it didn't have a chance to participate in the decision of what was done with it.
Yep. I like that a lot.
have
So- No, seriously, if the town of Gorey said to their council, we want you to do something, then the town of Gorey ought to pay for it. And if they want others to pay for what they want done, then the others have the right to say, yeah, here's how I want you to spend my money. Or not spend it, as the case may be. So this process seems somewhat flawed.
Again, it's, in this case, it came down to the finances. The Conservation Authority doesn't have the opportunity, the money to do the other two options. I would suggest the cost of decommissioning is well beyond what our reserves are. So we don't have the money to do that. As per our policy, we asked the municipality if they wanted to take on the costs, basically take on the structure and the costs. And the direction, as I said previously, that the representative from Howard Township said that it was beyond the means of Howard Township.
So then from my perspective, all right, the do nothing option needs to be revisited. If the people of Gorey are not willing to pay for it, do nothing. Let them put up with the unsightly mess. They want it fixed, cough up the money. But why should the two of us pay and the rest of the people around the table when I could find Gorey by plugging it in my GPS. But the likelihood that I'm gonna go there to look at, an unsightly broken dam is not very high.
So the issue of the site is just one of the issues with dam structures. You also look at, so the idea of conservation authorities is we look at issues beyond municipal boundaries. We're looking at them from a watershed perspective. So one of the things that one of the aspects was the environmental improvements to decommissioning the Gorey Dam. So it's a benefit to the overall fishery to not have an obstruction to fish passage for basically May through September. So we also have the pond, sits water, warms it up. So there's, again, you have algae growth as well as others. So there's benefits in overall water quality that everywhere downstream is going to benefit from those decisions. So I would venture that although there's one component of not looking at it, there's the water quality and other issues, like from a tourism, the fisheries, there's other aspects that to just the site of a structure.
Is the Maple Valley Conservation have any concerns or any input into the outcome of this dam in those regards, as to fishing and the same things that you said you took into consideration for the dam that Maple Valley owns themselves, to put the costing onto the fellow towns and the townships around for the levy to fill that in?
So
Is there any, would that mean there would be then that same concern for this structure?
So to back up on that, so the first piece, so when the Maitland Valley circulated, how dams were going to be paid for, the question to the municipalities was, do other municipalities want to be paying for dams to be replaced? And the answer was, no, we don't want to replace it, but the other municipalities, all, the general feedback, the majority of the feedback was that they would support the funds to decommission, because it's an asset that Maitland Valley owns, so it's an asset they have to deal with it. It's sort of, as an organization, that was how the members elected to go with their policy. As far as, because Maitland Valley owns it, we were looking at those other impacts.
And that's a much better reason.
As an owner.
Yeah.
However, those other impacts, as a non-owner, are covered by other pieces of legislation, like the Fisheries Act, for example. So we're not providing comment on the Fisheries Act to North Huron related to those other pieces. So that leads to question 4, as I may continue. Did the analysis leading up to the recommendation to decommissioning the Gory Dam involve assessment of impact on Howson Dam? If so, provide details. So again, as we said, the decision so far was based on the numbers of not being able to afford the other options. So once we have the scoping meeting with M&R will basically say what studies are needed. I would say when we were to look back at June 23rd, one of the issues with us operating the structure was we have to operate it in conjunction with the other dam owners, so we couldn't operate it when we wanted to operate it that day because of
Pressure that was there.
because of direction that we got from North Huron. So
Say that again?
so as a dam owner, when we release water from one of our dams, although it's not flood controlled, there is a temporary surge of water. So that surge of water, for a matter of hours, is going to restrict the ability of the downstream people to operate their dams. So typical flood control dams are designed with various techniques, so regardless of the flow, you can open the gates.
Of course.
With the stop logs configuration we have, once you have a certain amount of water pressure, you can winch all you want and you snap cables is what happens. So when we're looking to operate the dam, our first question downstream is, can we release this water? And if the answer is no, based on the correspondence we have from M&R, we hold off our operation until the other owners say that, yes, you can, it's okay to operate.
I'm still confused. I confuse easily, so it's not a big deal.
So basically, before we operate the dam, we
That
have
part
to
of-
make sure with the other downstream dams, which are, one is operated by the Rock City Village Management Committee, the other is operated by North Huron. So we have to check with both and say, we want to release water, can we pull our stop logs?
We heard from, and here's my confusion. We heard from Sean, they don't operate the dam. What they do, in the spring, they put in logs, and in the fall, they take them out. That's not operation, that's just, an activity at the beginning and the end. That's not an operating. You're not raising and lowering weirs to adjust levels. You're not adjusting weirs for water control in the river. None of that jazz. So in the spring, the logs were installed, and then you call a month or two later and say, can we release the water? Why does he care?
So generally speaking, in extreme events, having the stop logs in place is a overall negative because you're
Agreed,
reducing
yeah.
the flow. So the rock sitter will operate, depending on some years, there's no operation required, but other years, there is operation required. So the idea is if you remove some stop logs, you're gonna basically buy yourself some time. So that day specifically, this is a bit of a red herring issue because when we look back post at the flows, even if we had been able to operate the stop logs the way we chose, the flows were so extreme that day. They still would have gone. But the issue is we need to operate with basically everybody on the discharge.
Mr. Chairman, one question for Sean. When you prepared your operating procedure that you handed out to us, you didn't indicate in there, if I remember correctly, and I'll pull it up in a minute, any cooperation with MBCA in terms of removing or inserting stop logs based on some kind of coordinated effort with other dam owners. So presumably, since you admitted to say that, it wasn't done. What you said was, we put them in the spring, we take them in the fall, and there was no in between. There was no, certainly on what you gave to us, there was no indication that there was ever any intent to, if the water level is looking like it's picking up, we're gonna pull out a few logs to let in the water. There was none of that in the procedure.
And we are talking about very extreme events that normally would be you're getting into your emergent, potentially
But that's-
operating your emergency.
In any event, it was not covered. The operating procedure was, put them in the spring, go around in the fall and pull them out, that's it. You don't do anything else. So extreme or no extreme, you don't do anything. So I'm a little puzzled about,
I think we'll let John answer the question that you asked him first before you want.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Basically, you're absolutely right. Like, it's not ordinary for us to manage or operate these stop logs. They go in the spring, they come out in the fall. I understand that there was a time, and this is more than a decade ago in talking to our lead hand, that there was a little bit of verbal communication, but as Steve mentioned, it really, there's not a whole lot of impact, and I think that they, over time, my sense was that they realized that the benefit of trying to manage these stop logs for specific events didn't merit its continuation. Now, I wasn't here for that event in 2017, so anything I say is only hearsay, but my understanding that there was a little bit of communication, but that our guys were unable to do anything because of the violent nature of the event and the sudden increases.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may, that was actually my question. Does the MCVA notify the town of North Huron to let them know that there's an extreme weather event? Because you're the ones, you're the ones with the monitoring and the flows that would know perhaps we're getting into something like that, right?
So that, I don't have my notes from that morning to give you the exact times, but my recollection was we have a list in the emergency plan of numbers to call that we get from North Huron. So I called in the order of the list, and the first person I reached in the order that was given was Reed Vincent. So I notified him at approximately 6 in the morning, based on my recollection about the event that was unfolding. So that was the start of it, and then we contacted Public Works to basically say we wanted to release water from the Gory Dam, and we wanted to make sure that was going to be okay for them in case they wanted to. Again, we were talking about an unprecedented event when we talk of getting 6 inches of rain overnight on a night that we were forecast to get less than an inch of rain. So it was quite and it wasn't just a thunderstorm in one specific area, it was most of the North Maitland got hit.
Big rocks do that, there's water out earlier.
So we contacted them at 6 in the morning, and they weren't actually able to operate until about 9 in the morning. So we wanted to operate at 6, but we had to wait until 9 for Roxeter, and then we wanted to get confirmation from North Huron. But again, irregardless of what happened with that operation, when we look at the post-flood, the volume of water it would have delayed I believe it was in around 15 minutes that we would have delayed that inevitable failure of that berm. So I don't want to distract of, that, other than there needs to be there should be coordination when we're dealing with extreme events as to how it, but now with the process to decommission the Gorey Dam, if that continues, we don't operate it with logs, so it just leaves the communication between North Huron and Howick as far as how they operate. But in our flood forecasting plan, we ask both municipalities what criteria they want notification at, and then we give them notification of those extreme events.
Go ahead, Sean.
Yes, just maybe to build on what Steve just said, it was only about, I want to say 6 weeks ago, I received a call on a Sunday morning from NBCA stating that they had evidence that they were expecting a 60 millimeter event over short duration. They relayed that to me and said, thank you very much, do with it as you wish. So then at that point, we had internally on the Sunday morning, I made a couple of calls and we had a consultation, determined that it was really going to be a non-event from our perspective. But just to say that there is that early warning system in place still. And when we hear these events, that's something that we would take into consideration. And probably largely because of what happened June of 2017.
That water came in fast that day.
It was an hour from the time that we found out that we were Gorey Dam, it was had
Here,
ruptured 2
one
times.
more, next one.
We would evacuate people.
I know,
You?
I was evacuated.
Go ahead.
So, it wasn't studied, the decommissioning Gorey Dam, the assessment of the impact on the Howson building wasn't assessed, when the decision was made to decommission.
So the decision to make the decommission was based on the fact that we can't afford to repair or replace. But now in that decommissioning, now the question, once we do the scoping study with MNRF, it will determine what studies actually have to be done. So we're still very early on in that process, that a decision is made, is this direction we want to pursue. All the study work needs to be done, and that study work will determine how that decommissioning goes.
So the answer is maybe.
No, that's what I was gonna ask, that was my question, that wasn't the question, I was just stating the fact, which I already understood.
Yeah.
So here's my question, do you believe there's gonna be any impact, based on you're the flood guy, so.
So if-
I meant that in a positive.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
if the Gorey Dam provided flood control value, that we no longer provided flood control, I would expect there to be an impact. But because the Gorey Dam doesn't offer flood control, when you have especially a summer event when the stop logs are in, the reservoir is already full, so there is no, even if it was a flood control structure and you operate right at the top, you have no reservoir storage. So I don't expect there to be an issue, but if MNR feels there may be at the scoping meeting, then that will get studied. Ultimately, it's MNR who gets to decide what gets studied.
So, Mr. Chairman, do you guys basically do what we do here then, logs out in the spring and back in for the fall kind of thing, like twice a year?
So there's a general operating procedure that's basically set weeks each year that they go in and out, and then based on rainfall and levels, those stop logs.
It's mainly
Or
around
flash
fish
storage.
migration though, isn't it?
No, it's basically to do, if we were to look at the, all three of the dams, depending on flood flows, there is an attempt to either, Blueville has flash boards, so attempt to lift flash boards. So there's always trying to basically increase the capacity for water to go through, which would lessen the risk to that structure itself.
Guess we'll carry on with questioning. We got really too far through it yet.
So we're on question 5, is the.
Yes.
Okay. So, how does the Howson Dam fit in the MVCA's plan for the region in which it operates? Does the MVCA recommend to keep the dam or decommission it or do nothing? If it stays, would MVCA recommend operating a mode different from the current operation? So, because if it was a flood control dam, we would have a plan for how all those dams are operated. But because we don't have flood control flood control dams, there isn't an overall operational plan, so we don't have a comment as far as how it's operated. Again, as I mentioned before, though, the key thing, again, that was in my letter, is we want to make sure that whatever decision North Huron makes, that it, of the many factors that it needs to include, it also includes the element of public safety, as well as the impact on developable land, as factors that are considered.
So the specific questions are, does it fit into your plan? No, it doesn't, because
There isn't a plan.
There isn't a plan, flood control.
Yeah.
Do you recommend to keep it, decommission it, or do nothing? Or do you have a kid?
So the board itself has not made a resolution to providing a letter. What, as staff, what we say is regardless of which one you do, which is up to North Huron as a dam owner, we want to make sure that you include, again, public safety. So part of that, the floodplain mapping is currently being updated for the, I'll call it the greater Wingham area. So that mapping, we're expecting it, if they work on their timelines in January. So as part of that, once we take delivery of that model, we could run different scenarios with whatever scenarios that North Huron asks us to look at, and then we could, from a public safety point of view, be able to give you input as to areas that would be either open for development or be flooded from development, just to provide more information related to public safety.
Does the Mayo Valley have any concerns with wetlands upstream of the dam? If the dam was removed, and it would be draining those wetlands?
So I am not aware of any concerns related to the dam and
Mr. Chairman, Stephen, what's the criteria for the floodplain mapping now?
So we are in this area of Ontario. It is, for this particular watershed, it is if the rain that happened during Hurricane Hazel in Woodridge, if that rain were to happen over this watershed, what would the flood flows be?
And,
So it's the Hurricane Hazel standard, which generally in this watershed far exceeds the 100-year event. And that's the direction that we have basically from the province to follow.
So if I could extrapolate that, if the June 2017 was a significant rainfall event and flow, the Hurricane Hazel one would be very, very significant, much greater than that.
Yes, over twice the rainfall.
So the floodplain area, since the effect of the Howson Dam for the 2017 event was insignificant from a flood control point of view, you applied the Hurricane Hazel rainfall, it's very insignificant.
From a sort of flood control point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. The question that we want North Huron to look at when they're considering the options is having the dam there during that big flood. Does that raise water levels and cause public safety issues? That the municipality may have advantages to not having either that liability from a public safety point of view, or are there opportunities to open up developable land as a result? But that's a question we can't answer. I'm offering that once we have the floodplain model in January, with direction from North Huron, as staff, we could take that model and run through some scenarios to give information to.
If we had that kind of water level, we wouldn't be here worrying about, talking about replacing the dam, we would down the stream a little further.
And the purpose with that flood standard, again, is to, so now there's before in Ontario, when people had flooding, it was basically the province that paid for flood damages. There was moved to insurance. But what we're seeing now in insurance from the June 2017 event is insurance companies are either trying to limit the maximum claim or deny insurance whatsoever. So the idea of having a high floodplain standard is you want to keep as much development as possible out of risk flood. the general, it's a risk-based approach.
So the last part of the question was, if it stays, would you recommend a different, an operating mode different from current operation? Probably not.
So I would recommend if you're looking at leaving it the same, one of the things you may look at is saying, are there ways that you could operate that differently to reduce the risk upstream as far as increased floodplain? So it would be an element you would look at. One of the issues with the general stop log configuration is your inability to operate once you get to a certain level. So the question is can the operation be changed that would allow you to operate even in high flow conditions? But the question for that and the balance would be, you want to look at what flood risk can you reduce by doing those actions.
So you haven't done any kind of studies that would say we really ought to consider doing anything or nothing
So we don't have the modeling to be able
to do that?
to do that. But again, with direction from North Huron, subject to staff time, we can run through some different scenarios if it would be advantageous to North Huron.
Number 6, I guess.
Okay. So dams on the Maitland River and its tributaries are not included in NERA's map of water management plans for Southern Ontario. Does this mean that MBCA does or should take more of an interest in the Howson Dam? If the dam were to be used for power generation, would it need a WMP? So just as, I'm not sure if there's familiarity with what that water management plan, but typically you have that in cases where there's multiple owners that are using either the water for hydro generation, flood control, or low flow augmentation. You want to make sure there's balance between all the owners. So since there are no flood control structures in Maitland Valley's area of jurisdiction, it's not surprising there's no management plan. And because they're not flood control structures, I don't believe that makes an argument for Maitland Valley to have more involvement.
But if it was converted to power generation or modified to accommodate power generation, then presumably it would need more.
Again, that would have to be from MNRF to basically say whether it needs it or not. I have no authority to say. If the township decides to repair the dam and obtain approvals to do so from MNRF and DFO, will any approvals or permits be required from the MVCA? So when it actually comes to time of construction, there will need to be permits for in-water work, but those are generally looking at construction and constructability and pollution issues that, so those are a question of discussions with that. There's always workarounds to make sure that pollution isn't done, that scaffolding isn't left in areas that are going to catch in the spillway, things like that would be the issues that we'd be looking at. But it would depend on whatever construction that is being proposed.
But, Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure I understand that whatever is required from MVCA wouldn't be a yes or no for proceeding with the work. It would be how the work was done.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, it's MNRF, which under the Lakes and Rivers Improvement Act, so we're dealing with the details, I guess, of the construction. We would provide, again, from a public commenting agency, as you're coming to that discussion or that solution as to, again, we want to make sure that public safety was looked at, all the things that I've said. When it actually comes to the time of the permits, we're just looking at the actual activities themselves. So do you have access to flow records from the North Branch of the river, say for the last 25 years? If so, can you advise us if there have been any flow rates both greater than 1 in 25 years during that time? So so the information is publicly available from Water Survey of Canada. I believe there's 67 years of data for the North Maitland. So during that time, there have been a number of events exceeding the 25-year, although I would say that to properly answer that question, our stream flow statistics for that gauge were last done in 1999, so I think you need to look at hiring a consultant to do a flow frequency analysis to be able to give you up-to-date information for that gauge. In the June event, we had the flood frequency analysis done for the Harrison gauge, which is considerably upstream of the North Maitland gauge, which is not many kilometers north of, sorry, not upstream of Cleveland.
So what was that reference for the data?
Water Survey of Canada. That said, we do have, we have downloaded data, I think we have 15-minute data, not the full 67 years, but I think closer to 50 years, that we could provide to save the downloading, but it's readily available information.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman, then, we've talked about this June 2017 rainfall flood event. Did the Conservation Authority or Water Survey of Canada put a return period event on that, classification on that?
So the North Maitland is a long river between here and Harrison, so we classified it we had the flood frequency down in Harrison, but not at the gauge that's above them.
Oh. What'd you classify it as in Harrison?
So that was based on the consultant, it was basically a 100-year event in Harrison.
And what would your opinion be about what it was here then? Greater than that?
I wouldn't suspect it's greater than, but without doing the flood having an updated flood frequency analysis. Because you figure in 1999, it was, there's another 20 years of a period of record, so you get a more accurate flood frequency analysis, if that was updated.
And that pretty much answers question 9 as well. What the information is on the waterways Canada.
Yes.
On to number 10.
So if the dam was to be removed, would you foresee the profile of the river changing due to scouring of the stream bed? If so, how much and how far upstream? Any personal experience with this? So I guess my answer would be similar to the previous person who sat in this chair, is that it ultimately would be, you'd have to do a study to look at what that impact is going to be. And then whatever, if there is a decommissioning plan, it's from other areas where I've heard, whether you're talking about scour or sediment, it doesn't mean something can't be done, it just means you need to address that, or whatever plan that you have.
Good reference to that, just when the lower town dam went out and what the water course looks like between there and the Howson dam.
Again, part of that deals with the scoping of the new MNRF, decisions made to look at what studies are required. Question 11, would you agree that there is some sediment built up in the pond? If so, if the dam was removed, would you expect the sediment to be eroded under the high flows and carried downstream? Could that be detrimental to the downstream reaches of the river and potentially the lake? Brackets, a rep from the Solid Bayfield Conservation Authority was recently quoted saying, quote, Lake Huron's health depends on inland actions, and she was specifically talking about blocking or trapping sediment upstreams that doesn't pollute the lake. So again, when you look, if you were to pursue decommissioning, one of the things that you would need to do is to actually figure out how much sediment is there, how compacted that sediment is, and based on that, decommissioning would have to have a plan so that sediment was not removed, was not flushed downstream. So it's, again, a matter of assessing, is it an issue, and then coming up with a plan to mitigate that issue if it's found to be one. It's more if sediment is a larger issue in dams. Some dam owners never remove their stop logs. So sediment is allowed to accumulate up to the sill of the stop logs, where there's less sediment accumulates in areas where stop logs are. That doesn't mean sediment's a non-issue, and I can't comment specifically for the Howson Dam because I've never seen a survey of the sediments, including professional comments on how much sediment is there without seeing the study.
Well, a follow-up question, the estimate for decommissioning of the Gory Dam, did it include sediment removal?
So when we looked at the top end, that was the consultant considered, that was one of the things, depending on how much sediment, and that's why there's, when you go from basically 400,000 to 900,000, the question is, how many issues do you have to deal with as as you get into the studies, and that's why there's that big. So theoretically, as more studies are done to understand sediment geofluvial impacts, then you're able to get more accurate, until you basically come to a tender package when you know exactly what you need to, what exactly needs to be done. Do you have any experience with or knowledge of inflatable dams? I know what inflatable dams are, but I don't have any experience with them. So, are you familiar with the community park along the south side of the Howson Pond? Do you think the pond adds beauty to the park? Do you think it overgrown floodplains, such as which now exists along the park downstream of the dam, the lower town pond used to be, is more or less attractive? So, I am a civil engineer. I don't have any expertise in natural heritage, so I can't give you an assessment of what from an aesthetic point of view. That's not my wife will tell you I can't pick out a pink color for a kitchen, so.
I figured you would avoid that one.
You walk through the park though with your kids, right?
What's that?
You walk through that park with your kids.
Does the MDCA own any dams within its area of jurisdiction? What are the future plans for those structures, maintenance or removal? So Maitland Valley owns the dam in Gory, which we've talked about, the dam in Bluedale on the Little Maitland, and the dam in Brussels on the Middle Maitland. So the current plan for those structures is to operate them their serviceable life. When they reach the end of their serviceable life, it's to give the municipalities the opportunity to take them over, or based on the current direction, to look at decommissioning.
You're not gonna buy anymore?
No. Are you familiar with what other CAs in Ontario are doing with the small non-flood control dams they own, such as Mitchell, Millbrant, Ayr, Exeter, Dorchester, Lucknow? So before I answer that, I'll just say, so Lucknow is on the 9 Mile River, which is actually an MBC's area of jurisdiction, and it's privately owned, so it's not
Similar to ours then.
only a much, it's got about a 50 square kilometer watershed, so it's a much
Smaller.
much smaller drainage area on that structure, as well as a very different river because of the number of wetlands upstream, so it's a less flashy flow on the 9 Mile River. But as far as specifics on the others, unfortunately, I don't have familiarity with those other structures.
Walkerman, are they municipally owned? The dam one?
I don't know.
That was
I figured if enough.
Yeah. No, you were saying that that's where you took the flood measurements.
Harrison.
Harrison, sorry.
Yeah.
Is Harrison only on?
There's no dam in Harrison. Well, there's very minor, very low dams that are privately owned. But, usually in raising water levels kind of 1 to 2 feet. Inconsequential. Would you think that there would be effects on the sewage lagoon and downstream if the dam was removed? So when we look in other areas of jurisdiction, so the Constable Dam is a good one where it's adding low flow augmentation, and the low flow augmentation, one of the things that does is it dilutes effluent coming from sewage treatment plants. So because Howson Dam isn't there for low flow augmentation, you don't store water there in the summer and then release more than things coming in to, I'm hard pressed to see the impact, but as the previous person said, perhaps there may be you know, in a dam breach analysis, you know, some backwater up there, but I don't foresee I don't foresee it as an issue based on my knowledge of the river system, but for the unfortunate concern, would be something.
That was a long list of questions for you there. Is there anything else at the,
Mr. Chairman, I just asked, why does the Maitland Valley own those dams? How did it come by that it isn't for flood control?
I wish I don't know the answer to how the ownership.
Did they construct them, or did
No, so they were mill ponds that
they took over?
they took over, is my understanding. Although, yeah, Andy maybe.
I think at the request of the member municipality, in most cases. We've got this dam here, and it's a nice area, and
So we just didn't ask, was that the town of Wayne didn't ask
I
them
guess
to
so.
take it over?
Yeah.
And at that time, because of the way the grant structure, we may have gotten
Yeah, there's more money back then.
grant to actually make the purchase itself.
And maybe even rehab them a bit.
But they're all originally were used, you know, for mill ponds, and historically, there were many dams on through the right, primarily for, you know, water power generation.
And at some point, the province said to the CAs, you're supposed to be in the flood control business, not in the recreation business of buying up little ponds. Those are not flood control structures, so we're not gonna give you any money.
And this one was a mill pond as well, yeah.
So, Mr. Chairman, just curious, the MVCA membership, how is that, like, I'm just curious about this, does every municipality have like one seat on the membership?
Not,
Like, is that,
so most municipalities have one member representing their municipality. There are, if we look at, there's a few very small municipalities that have little tiny chunks where there's one member that shares 3 municipalities. So our Minto representative also represents chunks of Mapleton as well as Wellington North. So, so the members themselves each member has a vote. The exception is when it comes to budgets. Budgets are basically, each vote is weighted based on the assessment within that municipality. So for example, certain municipalities with very low assessment have their vote has less weight, but that only comes at the time of, basically at budget. Every other meeting, each member has one vote regardless of the size, or that.
so I assume North Huron has representation?
yes, neither man nor certain.
Okay, so from a fiduciary standpoint, so this is, so this is just a suggestion I'll throw out. From my perspective, it basically seems the luck of the draw of whether these mill dams ended up in the hands of the MCBA or whether they didn't. They ended up in the hands of municipalities. And yet now it's coming to decommissioning costs, the ones that ended up in the hands of the MCBA, those costs get spread across all the member organizations. And the ones that happen not to, don't. I certainly think that might be a discussion point at an MVCA meeting. That, you know what, just because of the luck of the draw, North Huron is tasked with the decommissioning costs of this dam where the ones with the MVCA are spread throughout the organization. I mean, that's my perspective. I don't know if that's a fair perspective or not.
So when Maitland Valley's decision as to how the plan is to deal with decommissioning, but again, that went to all the different members, took it to their council, but that wasn't a question asked of do we want to take on the costs of other people's infrastructure. That wasn't a question. So we've already, there already has been a discussion where every council had the opportunity to voice their input. And based on that input, the members voted for their current policy, which is to spread the cost of decommissioning out. So that's gone through that process once.
I think, Mr. Chairman, the question is, did the councils of the member municipalities understand the significance of that particular decision? Because it could have been voted down at the authority board level, but it apparently wasn't.
Yeah, so whether the council at the time wished to give up operations and send it into the hands of another organization was
No, that's not what we're
thought,
talking
no.
about. We're talking about whether, for example, North Huron thought it was fair and reasonable that all the municipalities in the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority help to pay for the decommissioning costs of the Gory Dam, or should the township of Howick pay 100% of the cost of decommissioning Gory Dam? And the same
I
issue
don't
will come
know
up
whether
with.
that's, I don't know whether that's, that conversation has never come to council.
It must have come to council sometime.
I believe it was, that's, I don't know the exact year that went to council, not that many years ago. That was one of the questions that got circulated to all the municipalities.
But I think he's specifically saying that Gory Dam, which has just been considered decommissioned this year, or come up with it.
They haven't tabled the money yet,
Yeah.
so that request hasn't been tabled yet, so it probably wouldn't get the high profile at council yet. It's implied in the act that they go by, but I don't think the actual dollars and cents would come from council.
Because I don't think, they haven't made up total mind on what's going on.
400 or
It'd be somewhere in that range, just,
And see, I guess my point, Mr. Chairman, is I see the logic in two scenarios. I see the logic in that the municipality where the dam resides bears the cost. I see the logic in that all dams within the MVCA, the decommissioning costs are spread throughout all member municipalities, right? I see the logic in those two scenarios. I don't see the logic in the dams that happened to end up in MVCA's hands 50 years ago get spread throughout all member organizations, and the ones that happen not to don't.
Would you,
That, right, I mean, there's no, that's just happenstance of what happened over
would you
there.
like to make a motion to ask, council to ask staff for some clarification on that process? And an answer from
I'm not sure, just, it certainly weighs into the option of decommissioning, right, of how those costs would be shared, so sure. I'll second the motion, I guess.
So, typing away there, everyone, anything on that motion? It's just I guess it's just to request from council to ask for clarification from staff on their partnership with Maple Valley. So as it concerns the dam. Get an answer back from them.
Specifically cost sharing for decommissioning of the dam. Because I understand that if the town of Wingham wanted to spend money on the dam, it would be the benefit of Wingham and no other really member organizations really. So I would understand we should bear the cost of repair or replacement, but if the decommissioning costs for all the other area dams are being spread.
Having said that, Mr. Chairman, couple of points. One is perhaps that's another option for us to be considering, is turn the dam over to MVCA.
It won't take it.
so I would suggest that would have to be a letter from
Council
council to.
MVCA.
To the board, to the
Board of the
to the
MVCA,
board.
saying, here's a dam. Okay.
Let's deal with this
Mr. Chair,
motion.
it would be an interesting conversation to have as why the organizations would have the right to say no. Honestly, if, right, it would be an interesting conversation.
But the report that was prepared for the Gory Dam by MVCA had a bunch of options that ranged, if I'm correct, from $500,000-ish to decommission to just under $1 million to rehabilitate or repair?
So repair was 1.32,
Oh, okay.
but the advice was they felt very quickly that you would, once you got into the work, you'd end up in the replacement option, which is the 2.3 to 3.5.
Okay, so, big dollars, none of those would be paid by Dory or by Howard Township. All of those costs, whichever option was chosen, would be paid by the member municipalities of MVCA.
So if I can just.
Is that correct or not?
No, that's not.
That's not correct, okay,
So the
good.
current policy is that decommissioning costs
Yes,
be paid for by all members, but the replacement be a special levy to that benefiting municipality.
oh, very nice, even better. That wasn't clear at the beginning. That's good. Good.
Just before we go ahead with any of the motion further, we've gone past 6 o'clock. I need a motion from the committee here to extend. Someone wants to make that motion? Yeah, seconder? Mike? Okay, now back to that motion.
Should we vote on that motion?
Would you like to vote on that motion? I was assuming that we would like to continue, but.
Nice.
Yeah. Can I have a vote of show of hands? All in favor? Barely passed. Could you read back that motion? Please?
The motion to extend the.
Yeah, no. The first motion we were trying to do before, just a request.
I think what Steve just said, maybe
Yeah.
clarify it, that it's for decommissioning only,
Yeah.
not for rejuvenation.
No.
So, Mr. Chair, maybe if I can get some clarification, what I had here is that staff would provide clarification on the relationship with Maitland Valley Conservation Authority with regard to costs for the costs associated with decommissioning of dams.
I think that's fairly stated. Mike, did you?
Yeah.
And I think it's specifically the Gory Dam, the implications of the Gory Dam, that the Gory Dam.
I guess the context would be certainly the relationship, but the relationship to North Ryan and BCA in that what is the likelihood or probability of getting agreement in the MVCA members about cost sharing of the decommissioning of the William Dam?
Yeah.
Didn't capture that, sorry.
So really the question is, I mean, and I don't, it's hard to phrase it in a motion, but I can just
Why
talk
don't you
to
write
it.
it, Rich?
Oh God, I don't know. How likely is that Wingham would be able to get the MVCA member organization to see to be quite honest, justice in sharing the decommissioning costs of the Wingham Dam if that's the decision that is made? I mean, maybe justice is fairness might be a better word than justice. But as I stated previously, there's been an agreement amongst all MVCA members that if a dam is chosen to be decommissioned, it's shared equally amongst all members, yet the Wingham Dam, if it's decommissioned, is poured solely on a single member of that organization. Which it's
Because of ownership.
yeah, just because some dams ended up in ownership of MZPA and some won't. And it brings it to the point that if Wingham offered MVCA to take it, the answer would be no.
So really, from our deliberations, though, why are we interested in this? I mean, we could say we want the council's rep on the MVCA to raise that with them and get it enacted. But really, from our perspective, it will color, perhaps, or impact our decision on our way forward. If it turns out that decommissioning is not going to be spent, I know that we're not supposed to consider funding, when making a decision, but quite clearly, if the funding cost is going to be intense because the costs are spread all around the MVCA's member municipalities, that will impact the decision. And really, that's what we need to know. If there's a likelihood or an opportunity for the decommissioning, and it seems reasonable, because all the dams that MBCA owns, if they're decommissioned, will be funded by the members. Then, even the ones that aren't owned should also be, and what we're looking for is some indication that that is a possibility from the MBCA.
If I might just ask the question of this scenario, as far as the Maple Valley Conservation Authority is concerned, is that even a possibility?
And that is a question you have to ask the members.
Yeah.
I as staff
The board
can't
would
ask. Can't-
They already have a policy. Do we know what their current policy is?
But it only affects the dams that they own, correct?
Right,
Yeah. So well, the question is, then, for our
that's a policy question.
Yeah, is to modify that policy for all dams in MBCA's area of operation, that if they're gonna be decommissioned, the cost will be spread similar. So,
Deep breath. Any capture any of that?
I think so. So maybe the best way for that motion to be worded is.
What is it
to-
locked up?
The town of North Huron to assess the possibility or the probability of having the MVCA take, share costs of decommissioning of the dam.
yes,
How's that?
that's.
And so how do you see that happening? The
Well,
North Huron member takes that
Yes.
question to the board of
The
the
board, yes,
Conservation Authority?
yes.
I think that's what would have to happen.
That's exactly what would have to
You'd
happen.
have to introduce a motion to the MBCA board.
But the only time you do that is if you're gonna decommission, right?
No, I don't think
I don't think
that's,
so.
I don't think that's the case. I think what we're talking about is, well, that's privately owned, I mean, it's a municipal owned. Should dams owned by a single municipality, should the dual decommissioning costs be spread across the entire MVCA organization? Just the same way as dams owned by the MVCA are. So really, I think all we're looking is for the North Huron member to take it to an MVCA meeting and report back on what the response was at the meeting. Was it no, was it maybe, was it hell no?
There's a motion.
Yeah.
So typically at those cases, so that it's in some ways it's similar to a delegation where the board has a policy of not making a decision when something's brought to them. So I would, in most courses of events, they would ask for take that information, ask for a staff report and recommendation, and at the subsequent meeting, deal with the issue.
That's right.
It's unlikely to deal with.
That's right.
And
Well,
are the
let's
meetings
hear
monthly?
first from the fast fingers, or fast writing ability as to
Try and
what they,
keep up.
yeah, what they
Well-
thought was first.
I'm thinking that maybe we could go with something like staff is to or staff be directed to investigate the opportunity to have decommissioning costs shared, or cost sharing for all dam structures within the Maitland watershed, within the Maitland watershed by.
Municipal. It's municipal dams, right?
municipal dam structures. And how that gets investigated will become just an internal function, there may be a letter to the MVCA. Delivered, but this would, for the purpose of the resolution of this committee, so staff to investigate opportunity to have decommissioning cost sharing for all municipal dam structures within the Maitland watershed. Does that capture the essence of the?
I think it's gonna need to be explained to them that would incorporate basically the MVCA taking over the dam.
This is the resolution, and
Yeah.
internally, I'll have to craft something that would go to the NBC board through Councillor Vanders.
Okay. I think it would just be the basics, that the wording of the policy, which currently says that dams owned by MCA, when they're decommissioned, those costs are spread amongst all of their municipalities. We changed the wording to say not just only dams owned by MCA, but all dams, municipal dams, within MCA's area of responsibility, area of control, or whatever you call it. We'll have that policy applied, that if they're decommissioned, then the costs are shared by all members. I think Mitch has got a valid point.
I think that's what that motion says.
Yeah.
To go forward.
It may turn into
Yeah.
something, you know, from council to.
Yeah, it may
we'll-
become,
we'll
turn
work on
into
it.
a committee, it might turn into a delegation towards one of the meetings.
Right. This gives direction to staff though, so I think we can definitely start with this.
I would expect it would involve a delegation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and then-
So,
but
Does MVCA meet monthly, or is it less often than that?
It is monthly except for the summer, and there's set business for each meeting.
Just wondering when we could expect a report back.
I was just gonna say,
So the
That,
first,
that's just so we can maybe
Don't
think
hold
about
your
that.
breath.
so the board package for this month meeting is due today,
Okay, so.
so it's
That-
likely already,
this-
it's likely sent
I
out.
can't guarantee that I
So,
can have this put together for next meeting.
You can't get on it then.
I cannot.
No,
There's a lot of irons in the operational fire right now. And other major projects, this is not a small resolution, I don't think. There's gonna be a little bit of work on this. And to commit to having something put together in the next week and a half, so that I could get it over to council.
I don't think it's holding us up.
No,
No,
this is probably
no.
something we need to have in our hands 6 months from now.
And I think, yes, if the
Before.
committee indulges me, I'll work on it,
Yeah.
but to commit to having it in the next month or two is not something I can actually keep as far as a commitment.
It was proposed and seconded, I guess, for that, the way that you had read that out last time would be sufficient. If the committee is in favor, let's show of hands. Yeah. Carries. Okay, thank you, that was all the questions, unless someone has anything else to add. That was quite informative.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to answer.
Sorry to keep you fast. Supper time.
Mr., I just had one, actually, it's probably a short question, and it's just curious, but, so it's curious, I know there's lots of flood control on the Grand River, but is there any flood control on the Maitland River?
There's no flood control.
And is it lack of need, or is it lack of almost like geological, geographical ability, a good spot to put a structure in?
So dams are a combination of you need geography so that you have enough of a valley that you can
Yeah.
actually store a sizable portion of water. And you need large enough of value in the floodplain that can pay for that very expensive structure.
Like the
During-
city of Cambridge, for example, they got flooded.
Yeah. So there were,
Yeah.
historically, there were studies upstream of Listowel to look at dams, and there's found that basically there wasn't, from a geography point of view, they couldn't store enough water to make a cost-effective solution to protect Listowel as well. In the 60s, there were studies it was later than 60s, there was I can't remember the exact year, historically, Andy may remember, that there was looking at options upstream of Harrison to look at flood control. And more recently, I looked at, as far as options to reduce flooding in Harrison, basically the amount of area you'd have to flood because of the geography is just huge and you have limited areas you can do it. And further, you can build up a dam so high and suddenly water's pushing into the Saugeen Valley watershed like here, which would be very not allowed. Yeah.
Common law prevents that.
Okay. Thanks.
But you're currently investigating flood control measures for Harrison,
We
right?
are, yes. So there are
Diversion is,
10 options from, vary from a few $100,000 to, I think it's 20 million. And so it's, we're currently in a process to look at, basically going through a process to narrow that down to basically one master plan. Well, thank you very much.
David?
Good job, Steve.
Okay, moving on, 6.0, correspondence, we have no correspondence coming into this office. Anyone have any other business? Excuse me. Yeah, I have that in mind after that. 7.1, general work plan. It's just an overview of our work plan here to make sure that we're keeping a steady pace, and I believe we are. We're starting to gather some information from the different mapping, the different organizations that have had dealings with the dam and the structure. I don't see any need at this point to amend the work plan. It seems to be well established, and we're moving along on it. Unless one of the council members wishes to augment this, we can skip that part. Seeing no objection to the general work plan. The title search was in your package. Sean has come across the grand ye old English fathers of the Declaration of Independence here.
It actually was,
Was it?
yeah. I got an original.
Mr. Chair, I can boil it down to 2 words, it's ours.
What about the pond area, Mr. Chairman? All of the pond area is ours.
He did not run searches above and beyond. It looks like, for all intents and purposes, they are ours, but he didn't go through the formal process.
These are roll numbers, right?
Yes.
Showing on this plan?
It's an extremely detailed map.
And I think when we were operating a few years ago with Kelly Church and Mrs.
That was something that,
Pat?
Yeah, Pat. We checked these roll numbers out, and all the roll numbers in the pond area were listed as town
it's based on the GIS, all of that is ours, so there was no question as to ownership, so I didn't go through the title search process on it.
Okay,
There
good.
was just so many questions surrounding, when you looked at some of the earlier stuff pertaining to the bridge, it was really quite broken up, so it was a good exercise in all fairness to confirm. It's quite interesting.
And so, and no conditions about, you know, the town has to erect a plaque or none of that kind of
Well,
thing.
you have to read it all, Mike, and
I guess.
interpret it.
Yeah. I was hoping somebody else did.
So, Mr. Chairman, does that mean, based on what the gentleman said earlier about affecting people's docks and that sort of thing, the docks and all that are attacked on town property anyways? So there would be an argument that we're changing our property, not theirs, basically.
Yes.
It wouldn't really affect anyone else's property
That's the
other
way I
than
was
the
reading
town's.
it all along.
I don't know about
Yeah.
that.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if I agree. I think from the pecunic, what was it called?
Riparian.
Prescriptive.
Prescriptive. I think really what I was referring to is if a person had a property where they could, had basically a usable pond or lake beside the property that they could kayak from, and then all of a sudden water level dropped and they no longer had that, that could be perceived as a loss of property value. And I don't think that's perception, I think that's an actual fact, that would be a loss of property value, whether you had a seasonal lake bordering the property or not.
But the fact is that their docks are on the town
Yeah, but
property.
they've had a prescriptive right to that pond every year for 100 years.
To use and enjoyment of.
Or look at it another way, you could potentially even have your property value drop because of the change in the operation of the dam, right? So therefore, that's when someone would sue is to reclaim lost value of property if they sold, right? Potentially.
Or loss of use of the pond.
Wonder why they removed. 8.0, reports. We have no reports that have come in. Takes it to 9.0, roundtable discussion. First I'll start off thanking everyone for staying a little later tonight and enduring and being patient with the questions and treating our guests with respect. That was nice to see. it was nice to hear from them. Anything anyone wants to bring up? Around table.
Yes, please. A lot of the information we have is on the website. It's excellent, it's accessible, it's good, the work that Sean's done. So I'm sitting here and I'm not connected. Is there any way I can get connected? Because I'm just now trying to open up 2 documents and I can't get them because it says I'm not online. The last one I just tried to do 1 minute ago was properties adjacent to the project area, which would tell us what the properties were, and I went to click on it and I can't get it.
Yeah, I can connect you.
You can connect me?
Yep.
Oh, magical, thank you. No problem.
So let that do, or if anyone requests it, they can be emailed out to everyone so that it's within this group and not publicized over the airwaves. My etch-a-sketch is down, so I don't know.
Get a lot of that, we connect next time.
Yeah.
We should, yeah, excellent.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted everybody to be aware that the comments that were submitted by the public to the first session of the environmental assessment when it was underway there a few years ago are now available. They're not available online because of privacy issues, but if you want to see them, Sean has said we can have Mackenzie make them available to you.
You, sir.
Yeah, if anybody wants to read it, it's a fairly thick pile of comments. We have them here, you can either set up an appointment, we'll just set you with a workstation, you can go through them. Again, I've been very hesitant to scan them, just simply because there's quite a bit of personal information on them, names, phone numbers, addresses, that sort of thing. But they are available and probably worth a quick review.
Next steps, scheduling delegations to attend the Wednesday, October 16th committee meeting. I think we've already.
Can I make a comment, please, Mr. Chair? Yeah. So at the last meeting, the committee suggested that for this October meeting, they might like to speak to KGS, the Ontario Rivers Alliance, and Mr. Peter White. I guess my only question before I start queuing these up, based on your experience tonight with the 3 delegations, is that something you want to repeat, or does the committee want to focus in on KGS next one? I just wanted to get clarification on that. I would hope that KGS is going to be a little longer, based on the scope that they're bringing to the table and the amount we're paid for. Just something to maybe ask the committee for direction on. I can still book all 3 if it.
We'll throw that out to the floor.
So I would suspect, Mr. Chairman, that they would be similar to the Maitland Valley, and if we scheduled them last and kind of left it open at the end,
Okay.
that would be good. I think the other 2 should be.
So I'll proceed with that then as we discussed with last meeting. Yeah. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to voice my objection to inviting the Ontario Rivers Alliance and to paying them anything. I've heard the presentation, some of the rest of you haven't, but it's a motherhood presentation, and
I read it online, you can read it online.
they're,
I did notice that quite a few of them all referenced them. I think it's not.
No, nobody's mentioned their name until Sean mentioned it.
What was the other one that you were mentioning?
These guys are very much a special interest group.
Which one has that's not the.
MMRF.
That's not the lakes and.
Oh, Lyra.
Lyra, okay.
Lyra.
So that's the one that.
This is a private group that's opposed to dams being built on rivers in Ontario. And their presentation would be that you should take the dam out because it's not a natural entity in the river.
So Mr. Chairman, my question would be, I mean, everybody comes at every situation with a bias, but do they have, is theirs largely a factual presentation, or is it largely emotional presentation?
I would have asked that question too.
I
Did they
don't
bring
know
any
if you
technical
can-
expertise, or is it strictly feely, touchy-feely.
Not the depth that I would have expected when we heard they were coming. We can try to pull up the audio or the video and distribute it to the, is that something? It's on the website, so we can look at it. I don't know if we can or not, but I can certainly see if we can.
Would they have hard data as to, you know, of how quickly the fish species remigrated and so?
I don't recall that level of technical, I'll see if we can pull up their information. It's still early in the process as far as setting up this next meeting, and if the committee wishes, I can distribute it and then look for feedback. I don't know if that's acceptable.
So, Mr. Chairman, I was expecting to hear some more of that from Maitland Valley today, and I didn't hear that. So, as someone who's new to this, I know Andy's had years of this discussion. I would find it valuable to hear that. If I can get it through video, that's fine. If we can't do that, then I will support hearing from them.
Could that be ascertained by just asking the question, if you were to come and give a presentation, would it be augmented by any more than what you have in your video?
I believe, Mr. Chair, that we have their report, like they had a PowerPoint presentation that went along with it, so I'll see if I can pull that off of the previous agenda. I'll see if the video is specifically available. It may not be. I certainly could point to it in terms of a time reference on that feed. So if it's the desire of council, or committee, sorry, I can send that out by email.
A different suggestion, Mr. Chairman. Why, as previously, Sean sent out a request for questions. Why don't we get the questions in and then evaluate whether there's sufficient questions to warrant them coming? Because quite frankly, if they're coming and they're gonna give us a presentation, I'm not interested either. I've already, you can see it online, so I've already done it. I've got some questions I wanna ask them, but if I'm the only one, I can just send it in.
And to follow up, Mr. Chairman, could we ascertain in advance if they can actually answer those questions? Because I think that's really what we're going for.
Well, fair comment, yeah.
Are they the people that can answer these
Yeah,
questions?
yeah.
Can you answer these questions?
Yes, because if they can't answer the questions, we're wasting our time. They're wasting our time and our money.
I guess this is probably something you can do without resolution.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. What I'll do is I will, tomorrow, will endeavor to send the call out for questions for these three organizations, and if the committee can get them back to me as quickly as possible.
We'll ask for the oral ones within a week.
Yes.
Yeah, and the others can take 2 weeks or whatever, but oral ones come in a week.
Sure.
Then you send them off and then evaluate the response. Yeah,
And in the interim, I will just, so that the whole committee has it, I'll see if we can't pull it's
Okay.
easy to pull the PowerPoint and to send the link for the YouTube saying it's from minute here and minute there. It should be pretty easy to do that.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, there was one other one, that question that comes up, and it was the reason that I pulled up this properties adjacent to the project area. I looked at this map before, and it shows that the bridges over the river, and there's a gray area that says properties owned by North Huron, and then there's some kind of orangey stuff that's private properties, and the municipal boundary. What it doesn't show is the boundaries, current boundaries, low water, high water of the river. So presumably the river is within the township of North Huron's property, but I don't know by how much. So it's not clear to me whether the outline is the high water river outline, and I don't know where this map came from.
Well, I think that we'll get a better idea of that with the LiDAR when it comes through, because you would do all the water levels.
That's a very good point, Mr. Chair. Like, I can pull up and distribute the floodplain mapping or the GIS. It'll show the flood zones, but it'll be based on the 1976 data. In the next few months, this committee's gonna see the data, probably fairly early in the process, that relates to the new LiDAR, or the new floodplain mapping.
All right.
I can certainly get it, but it's, I would take it with a grain of salt.
This year?
And
All right.
And them saying we didn't have a reservoir. I remember when I came over the 486 out there, full, that's a reservoir, isn't it? And that's after the dam.
Yeah. The dam in lower, the bridge in Lower Town is probably effectively one of the biggest flood control measures that Maitland has because it backs all the water up.
Before we get to 11.0, I'd like to come back and bring back in the
Oh, yeah, the
minutes
minutes.
from.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, just in the second paragraph of number 7, it's just a typo here. KGS has indicated October would work best for them. So then we said KGS, BM Ross, and Sid Vanderveen are currently available for September. I think we meant BM Ross and Associates. I think we meant MDCA instead of KGS,
Yes, that's correct.
right? And then if we go down to another typo to the 1, 2, 3, last line in the 4th paragraph, the them, there should be then, and then passing the questions forward. And then if we go to the paragraph at the top of the next page, this is kind of the 3rd paragraph that starts with Hutchison indicated potential implications. This word alongside, I didn't quite think it's the right word.
Associated.
Should it be with or associated with?
Yeah, I think associated with, and I think my point was that we should probably make contact with Westcast for them to make that assessment. This kind of implies I'm making the assessment that there may be a hazard if the dam's taken out. So as part of that, it was just that we make contact with Westcast's environmental person to ask them if there's any implications of their berm being damaged if the dam is removed.
So that's the one that has the wells, if I remember correctly, the monitoring wells.
Yeah.
And the data is collected by Westcast?
Yes.
Yes?
They haven't any. Well, at the time I was there was an environmental company that would come in and do periodic
Right.
testing. It's part of the closing agreement of the landfill.
Right.
It's a big landfill.
So then, Mr. Chairman, if we go down just into the next paragraph, Martin mentioned the expression of health concern signs. I don't think expression is the right word, and I don't know what Mike thinks is the right word.
I'm not sure, but what the topic was there are no swimming signs by the pond that says due to high bacteria levels. It's permanent
So what
signs.
about existence, the existence
That
of
could be, yeah,
health concern signs?
yes, yes.
Is that okay?
Yep, that'd be good.
And then if we go to McBride indicated the reason the stop logs won't work in the older section is because the sills, that word should be sills, S-I-L-L-S, are eroded, period. And not maintained doesn't really apply. Okay, Sean? Okay.
I've got it, we'll just have Kenzie update it.
And then, again, I guess I'm quoted here, starting at the bottom of that page and going on to option does not address the Lake River Improvement Act. Do nothing may be considered as negligent and could consume large amounts of liability. I think it should be not consume.
Assume.
Yeah, how about could lead to? That's okay. Lead to large amounts of liability on the township rather than consume. And then Mackenzie and I had this discussion earlier today under next steps. The 1, 2, 3, 4th paragraph, the committee was in agreement. That's a Mackenzie word. The word should be.
It is a word, I looked it up.
It is.
It's a word.
What dictionary were you using?
The website, online. Hasn't been used since the 1900s.
Agreement, I think.
let's go with agreement. Unless we're bringing Old English back.
Well,
You brought this stuff.
Yeah.
Yale,
Yeah.
Better than Jeff.
hate to see the carry a pigeon.
And I think down in that last paragraph in that section, Mike, the core samples that KGS took were, do you remember when they were exactly? It wasn't 16, was it 17 or 18?
Oh, where are we, sorry?
In the last paragraph under next steps, it was noted by McBride, the core samples from 1984 and,
2018.
I think it was 28, was it just last year?
No, 16, it is 16, 15, 16, 15/16.
When
There were some
KG did them?
Yeah,
KGS?
KGS did the core samples.
2015,
No,
I was here for them.
2016.
January 2018.
It couldn't have been, because they issued the report in 2016, didn't they?
No, they issued the report last year. I witnessed the coring.
17?
April 2018.
I think we gotta check on that date. It wasn't 16 anyway.
I think it was after Christmas. Was it not after Christmas? Right?
Yes, January.
Yeah, I believe it was January 2018.
This letter about closing the dam just came in April of last year,
Yeah.
so that must have been when they were
Okay.
there to do the core sample.
So, 2018.
Okay, those are the significant ones I had.
I need a motion to accept the minutes as amended. Rob, and seconded by,
Cedric?
all in favor? Okay. Scheduling of the next meeting. Are you gonna do the,
If it pleases the committee, can we do a doodle pool once I need to talk to the delegations.
We already sent it.
Well, I need to confirm with the delegates that they're still available, because schedules move and change, and there's no sense scheduling something if we can't get KGS.
So tentatively, it's October 16th.
We'll continue to target that, but if there's any issues with that date, I'll send a doodle poll out.
Okay.
well, nothing further towards this,
I move we adjourn.
uh, 6:40, or, yeah, 6:40.